Views just an hour ago. And welcome everybody to Local 4 and our Click on Detroit set here in the Local 4 newsroom. We are talking food allergies today, and we've got some experts from a variety of levels here to talk. And it's a conversation. We're talking. We have a lot of things to talk about. And we also want to hear from you. So you can obviously follow us on our Local 4 Facebook page, and we'll be looking at your comments. And if you have specific questions, seriously, this is a good time to ask those questions because we have the experts here. Dr. McGeorge, of course, is here, and you're working on a story today. Tell us a little bit about that and who will be talking.
Well, actually, Dr. Kim is primarily my expert today, and we're going to be talking about new research that's in food allergies, particularly early introduction of foods, and in order to prevent allergies from developing to begin with, and then a new strategy perhaps to desensitize children that's still in clinical trials but shows a lot of promise.
And we have Randy Speck here as well, and he is with the Madison Heights School District, and he can talk a lot about interaction with kids, schools. We talked about bullying last night at 11 o'clock. Also, what needs to be done next, and he has a different perspective because he sees it from a superintendent's point of view, but also as a parent. You have a 14 and a 9-year-old.
14 and 9-year-old, they both have peanut, tree nut food allergies. My son also has beef, dairy, egg, and sesame. And so when you put all those combinations together, it becomes interesting sometimes to plan for meals, especially when you go out. But when you go into a school system, that's when you're releasing your children into this other world. And
it's frightening.
Into this other world. It is frightening. And so you want to make sure you have a school district and principals and school administrators who are going to be able to work with parents. And so that's one of the things that's important to our family.
And that's what we talked a little bit about last night at 11. There's some school districts that get accolades for being, whether it's peanut-free or being just open to having that conversation. But it all comes down to the kids and their experience, because they're there to learn. But I guess we should just first start with our first topic, because it seems whenever we do food allergies, the first thing we get is bullying. Kids feel bad, parents feel bad sending them to school. Sometimes we get the comments of, well, why are we doing so much for kids with allergies, and they don't understand. So you're in an interesting spot because you need to figure all of that out. What are you seeing now?
Well, you see the same thing. You see parents who are asking for some accommodations, just like when we do if we have a child who has diabetes, just like we have children who have other disabilities and other limitations. They come in and they talk to school officials, and school officials are more accustomed to talking about how we make accommodations for that. But it's sometimes hard to see, because I've talked to dads before who will say, you know what, you mean that my child can't have their peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or what if they had peanut butter for breakfast this morning? You mean you're going to make my child not have peanut butter so these other kids? And the answer is yes.
Yeah,
because
it's life-threatening.
It's life-threatening. It's life-threatening. So we might have to sometimes say to one family, you might have to be a little inconvenienced. And quite frankly, not having peanut butter is not that big of an inconvenience. So we can find some other alternatives. But we want to make sure that school environments are open places and welcoming places, because the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 7-year-old, they already have enough kind of pressure that they're dealing with when they're thinking about, what am I going to eat? Is this thing that I'm getting ready to put in my mouth going to cause me to get sick? To add schools not working with them is too much for a kid to take.
What's your perspective, Doc?
Yeah, so I see a lot of parents who've been on the bad end of that, right? So they've dealt with schools who have never dealt with someone who's had a child with a food allergy, or they have children who've actually been ostracized from that, or they've, I had a mother who wouldn't let her son attend any school parties or school functions because he had an egg allergy. And so he missed so many days that he got a truant letter, right? Or the same mother, her child was made to sit outside in the classroom in the hallway because the teacher was just not comfortable with how to handle his food allergies. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And I think what you just said, having an open conversation with parents, is the first step.
Yeah. It really starts at the beginning of the school year. If it's an elementary classroom, making sure that classroom teacher, along with the music teacher, the art teacher, a special ed, every PE teacher, anyone who's going to have access to that child and be working with that child, is in that very first meeting a week before school starts.
Months before the school starts,
if you can, to make sure everything is lined out and understood and talked about to where the faculty feel comfortable. And at the same time, the parent has to feel comfortable, and the child. We certainly want the child to feel comfortable, but have those discussions early, and then that classroom teacher, especially at the elementary level, can take that message forward to the other parents in the classroom and really take the lead on that. And my experience is when you see a classroom teacher take the lead on that
Right.
and advocate for their students, then there are going to be few problems.
Well, and Dr. Kim, in addition to being an allergist to Henry Ford, you have a unique experience with allergies as well, and one of your children in particular. So how did you prepare them for school?
My children or the school? So I have a peanut and tree nut allergy too. So I think when I was growing up, people were like, what is this thing? I never got bullied from it because I don't think it was that common. So, just from a personal perspective, I know like I always have to have my EpiPen with me. So, looking at schools, you always have to have a conversation with, whoever it is, starting with the school office. What are your policies on how to handle food allergies? What policies do you have for their EpiPens? Do you have is it a nut-free classroom? Is it not? What do you do when you go on school trips? What do you do when you're going on the bus? There's lots of things to think about. I think, and you know this, right? So there's lots of situations where you have to be prepared for that. But I think the conversation and the thinking about it has to start. By the time school starts, it's almost like, well, gosh, I never thought about all these complicated things you have to navigate. So you actually got to start with that, before the school year starts, so in the summer. Yeah. So I
think there's a lot of medical questions too.
Yeah.
I think people say, okay, are we too clean now? Did they change the way certain foods are made or processed? Can you explain to us some of the advancements of what you have at least learned from? Why are we seeing these allergies? And also, Randy brought up a point, you don't see the high level of allergies in certain type of socioeconomic groups. Why is that?
Correct. So, years and years ago, these recommendations have changed over time, but years ago it was always, don't give your kid any kind of allergenic food until they're 3 or 4 years old. No nuts, no peanuts, no fish, no anything. Introduce one food at a time, always spaced out by several weeks. And I think in terms of the allergy community, we found that perhaps that was doing more harm than good.
Not to wait that long.
Correct.
So what are we supposed to do?
So I think the most pertinent thing in the past couple of years, there have been some papers that have come out showing that early introduction of peanut into certain individuals, certain babies, is beneficial for actually preventing food allergy, peanut allergy specifically. It's introducing peanut if you're a high-risk child who has eczema, which is an itchy rash that a lot of allergic babies develop, and you also have an egg allergy. Those would be the babies you want to intervene on because they seem to be highest risk for actually developing food allergy. So those
How
babies.
do you do that though as a mom? Because I have to admit, I'd be freaking out.
Right.
Even if you don't think you have an allergy, but you're just like, I'm going to test this. Do you test it at your house? Do you go to your doctor's office? Do you kind of walk us through?
Right. So if you have if you have
What if
a
you
baby,
don't even have a risk?
Right.
What if you're just...
If you don't have a risk, go ahead and try it when you think it's appropriate for the baby. So you got to make sure the baby can sit up, can chew, can
Okay, so that's with no risk.
Correct.
And
correct.
you can
if no risk.
Okay.
If that baby, and also if that baby to you doesn't look like they have any kind of skin rashes, so you can actually give them a little taste of peanut butter.
Okay.
See what happens. Watch them, and then give them some more.
Now the next level. What if
The
now
next
you are
level,
at risk?
So
What do you do?
if you're a baby who is at risk, so if you have a coexisting egg allergy or if you have eczema, which is those itchy, weepy rashes that can happen, what they're recommending is first you get tested, whether it's by blood testing or skin testing. Okay, your pediatrician can do the blood testing for sure to just check a peanut allergy level, and then if it's negative, you can refer them to an allergist to get a food challenge to peanut. But most of the recommendations are based on after you have a positive blood test, send your baby to an allergist and get skin tested, and then base your decision to give that baby peanut based on the size of the skin test reaction.
Now I have a question about the
Yes.
tests, only
Yes.
because we talked to a lady, Alexa, she's a college student, she's 19. She did the food tests and found she grew out of her allergy to
Sure.
almonds.
Yeah.
And it had been a couple years, and then she decided, I'm going to have a little bit of almond butter. And she had her very first attack. Thank goodness she had her EpiPen. So how are you supposed to trust the test?
It's tricky, right? So it's really tricky. We talk about that all the time. Kind of what do you test? What do you trust more? Do you trust a blood test? Do you trust a skin test? And so that's the purpose of doing a food challenge. You can get the skin testing. Sometimes we follow blood year after year after year to see how it's gone up, if it's gone down. But then if we think it's at a safe enough level, a low enough level where you might pass a challenge, and then we would go ahead and offer a food challenge in clinic. And that's not anything new. Allergists have been doing that for many, many years. But I think what's different is, in terms of the peanut issue, is trying to introduce it so early in life, like 4 and 5-month-old babies, giving them, and there's different ways to do it. You can make a peanut butter smoothie. There's also this little peanut puff that you can dissolve in water. You can buy peanut powder and mix it with different foods. So these challenges can take a while to do, but once it's done, especially if you're a high-risk baby, they're recommending a certain amount of peanut to be fed to that baby consistently per week.
How are you supposed to change the attitudes? Because I think when we were teasing that we were doing a story about food allergies, one of the very first emails we got was one of those parents, oh, kids are wimpy these days, and we have to cater, I feel like we have to talk to them, because we're all talking, our audience cares about food allergies. Our audience has a child with an allergy. Our audience, you know what I'm saying? But there's a lot of parents there that don't understand it, and how do we get that message to them effectively so that negativity can stop? I don't know.
Go ahead.
Well, so I think education first is key, and then I don't know. So most of my friends know I have one, so it wasn't a big deal. And I worry about my kid. So he's only 6, and he's got a peanut allergy, and he has to sit at the peanut-free table. And it's interesting to see, like, I try not to make a big deal about it, right? Because I don't want to make him feel different. But I ask him, like, oh, what'd you do at lunch today? Oh, my friend sat with me, and, I hear from other parents of kids in that classroom, like, oh, he didn't want to bring peanut butter to school because he was chosen to sit with, him at the peanut-free table. So maybe there's hope, So I worry about the bullying, too, for sure.
And I was going to say, outside of that small percentage of kids who are involved in bullying or anything like that, that's what you see more of. You see kids who, over a period of time, they start to develop their friendships, who are people who want to sit with them at their table, and who also are agreeing, because if you're going to sit at the peanut-free table, you don't have an issue with peanuts, you're then saying, I care about my friend, my 6-year-old friend or my 12-year-old friend, more than I care about my peanut butter jelly sandwich. So I want to have my parents will pack turkey for me or whatever it is, so I can go over there. Kids are more mature about this in many ways than the adults are, than the parents are. And because kids, I think, for the most part, again, outside of the bullying stuff, they want to be with their friends.
Right, they want to be with their friends.
They want to be with their friends, and they do a nice job.
Do you see, I know this sounds weird, but in the ER, do you ever see people who weren't aware of certain allergies and then they're brought in just because,
all the time.
But even older, or is it mostly kids?
No, all the time, actually.
So,
you see adults that, either have developed something over their lifetime, or perhaps it's their first exposure. They may have had a very limited food set for most of their life, and all of a sudden, as a college student or, a middle-aged adult, they went to some restaurant, they had some unusual food, and sometimes we don't actually identify what the allergy is. We just know that they have a bunch of facial swelling and they're short of breath. We treat them and we send them to Dr. Kim. And so, that's the follow-through is, we ask them what they might have eaten. We try and make a best guess. But a lot of times we don't actually know. When we tell them, well, whatever you ate, avoid that until you see an allergist. And in the meantime, here's a bunch of steroids, here's a bunch of antihistamines, and here's an EpiPen if it was a severe enough reaction to begin with. Now, sometimes we see people with a lot of milder reactions, and we may not prescribe an EpiPen from the emergency department, but we'll still give them, for example, antihistamines, and tell them to avoid something, until, a food set, until they follow up with an allergist. But that's why those kinds of follow-throughs are really important, because determining whether it's an allergy or just maybe a sensitivity can actually become relevant as well. And those are, again, some of the finer points that an allergist would be able to determine that we don't necessarily determine in the ER.
But a sensitivity can turn into an allergy 5-10 years later.
They're a little bit different, actually. And, along those lines, there is a distinct difference between an allergy, an allergic reaction, and just a food sensitivity like lactose intolerance, for example. Okay. Those are actually different things. And so, and we expect different types of reactions. So it's important to know what you have, because that does dictate to a degree the severity. So for example, if you have a lactose intolerance, that's not a true allergy. That's an absence of a certain enzyme that eliminates lactose in your intestines, and so you might have a lot of gas, bloating, abdominal discomfort, but that's not going to kill you. As opposed to a true milk allergy, that is something that could become deadly over time if you were exposed to enough of the allergen.
What do you think about those cards? And I know sometimes people carry them, whether they're going to a restaurant or a party. A lot of this is for young people too, to inform their wait staff or parents at a kid's party. You know, these are all my allergies, and share that. Have you seen a success with that? Because some people feel like that's a false comfort.
Yeah, I don't think I've had any parents come to me carrying that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of the comfort level, you know, when we think about kids going to birthday parties and things like that, is the dialogue that has to exist between the parents. You know, so you know, the mom's going to have a birthday party for her kids, and we're going to invite kids over, and one of them has food allergies. That dialogue really needs to be from the host family.
Before, right?
Yeah, for the host family to the parents of the folks with food allergies, saying this is what we're going to have. Or we're going to have this, and we want you to be a part of the planning process because we really want your daughter, we really want your son to be there, and that's a big deal, you know. And Dr. Kim, I don't know what numbers you see as far as statistics, but you know, it's 1 in 13, 1 in 12 school children in this country have some type of food allergy and concern. That's a big number.
That is.
That's a big number.
Yeah, and you know, that sounds about right. The other thing is, as you said, it seems to be more common, and so maybe that's why with the young kids that we're seeing now, you know, in kindergarten, first grade, maybe that's why we're not seeing so much bullying. Maybe in the older kids we kind of missed that opportunity, but now it seems like, oh yeah, you know, that Bobby has a milk allergy, so I can't bring milk, or it's just kind of like, oh yeah, that kid has that allergy, big deal, whatever.
Well, you know, medically speaking, we had talked about this before. Medically speaking, why do you think it's becoming more common? And, you know, we talked about the changes in the microbiome, the bacteria that we're exposed to, that kind of thing. Talk about that.
Okay, so not just here at Henry Ford, but there's a lot of papers that are published about the microbiome. And the microbiome is kind of the sum total of microbes on your body. We're trying to determine on in every surface of your body. So supposedly there's more microbiomes on you than you. So that makes the bulk of you. Trying to determine kind of what combination of bacteria are beneficial, what combination could be protective. It's not going to be just one single bacteria, but maybe it to be colonized with this kind of bacteria first, and that lays the groundwork for other kinds of beneficial bacteria. So it's really, really complicated. The analysis on these are super complicated. They need supercomputers, and the analyses take weeks and weeks to do. But the thought is that yeah, the microbiome is important in all sorts of the gut, and so we're trying to figure out, like, you know, where does that happen? How does being born different ways determine that? How does
have you learned the difference of that? Is there a quote benefit of a C-section baby compared to a vaginal birth, and
so
does that
on what
change?
Study you look at, yeah.
So it's not very
well,
concrete.
and there have been studies suggesting that if you have a baby born by C-section, if you expose them to the vaginal fluids immediately after they're born by C-section, they have a lower incidence of certain allergies and sensitivities.
Okay.
So there is actually a lot of research being done in basically healthy intestinal, in particular, bacteria. But that sort of goes along with the whole question earlier that you were sort of alluding to, and that's the cleanliness. Are we too clean? Are we limiting exposures too much? And, you know, we had talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, and so, yeah, that used to be called the hygiene hypothesis, right? And so, yeah, the thinking was that perhaps we were too clean and we weren't exposing our babies to enough stuff. We were wiping everything down. They weren't going outside. They weren't putting dirt in their mouths. They weren't playing outside enough, and so that's kind of how this whole microbiome thing got started. And also when they, you know, there were studies in Europe where they looked at kids who actually lived in farms, and these setups were different. They actually lived in the barn with animals, and so they were exposed to a ton of microbes that you know, people in more urban settings weren't exposed to ever. And so those kids had very low risk of asthma and allergy and food allergies compared to their counterparts. And so a lot of this started with those observations that were made in Europe.
Because it's interesting, in your school district, Randy, you say, you know, with the socioeconomic, you have some, actually a low rate of kids that are dealing with, comparatively to another district that might have maybe a higher income.
Yeah, that we know of, because I think one of the things that you find in certain communities, in certain areas, is if there's not a high level of participation with primary care physicians, we're going to the doctor, we're getting regular checkup, then they may just think it's a stomach ache. They may just think that they're not feeling well, they're not diagnosed, and so that can be scary as well.
Right.
Because you don't have all the information. With the students who are in your building, you don't necessarily know. So just have to make sure, I think, within our schools that we're open to the type of food we're serving the best we can, that we're listening to families, that we're hearing of their needs, and when we have a severe need, that we make sure we address it.
Well, along those lines, though, what are some of the symptoms that you hear about from kids or from parents of kids that turn out to have allergies? So, in other words, help them make the diagnosis.
Right. So I guess the obvious ones are like, I fed my kid a peanut and he blew up. He had hives on his mouth, hives all over the face. He started drooling. You could hear noisy breathing. Those are some of the more obvious symptoms. A lot of times, though, they're more subtle, right? So some parents say, like, yeah, he just keeps spitting the food out. And he says his mouth burns a little bit. And so, so these kids, their reaction can happen that fast. So you have immune cells in your mucous membranes in your mouth, and the reaction can happen that fast. So speaking personally, I know that happens to me for sure. If I eat something that's been contaminated with nuts, you can feel the warmness, the tingling, you feel a little bit of just something not right. So that can happen really early on. I think it's hard to ask a really, really, really young child, like, oh, hey, Susie, you're 8 months old. Tell me about what happened when you ate that. So it can be hard to pick up, and so I think that's how seeing an allergist could be useful in that regard if the history's unclear.
We did talk a little bit, and we will be talking tonight at 4, 5, and 6 about restaurant regulations, and they're training now under new law in the state of Michigan, to better train the wait staff, better train the cooks. You're a parent of 2. Does that comfort you more? Because I'm sure you're most of the time with your children when they go to a restaurant, but they're at that age, the 14-year-old, where they may be going by themselves. Does that give you some comfort, or is that not enough?
It gives us comfort because it's a start. It's a start. You'll go into some chain restaurants, and they're just not equipped. They're not equipped in their kitchen to be able to cook things where the cross-contamination won't happen, because that's really one of the biggest issues.
Right, cross-contamination.
We're talking about food preparation, especially if you're not in control of that preparation. A lot of times in our cases, our children just take their food with them. Right. We may stop by a Subway and we see it made, and then we take it with us wherever we go. And most every restaurant has been good with that. But it's nice to hear that some restaurants are taking that serious, because there's a huge population of folks who would love to hear the fact that the kitchens can accommodate and be an on-demand service for the needs of the folks who are coming in, bigger than just a gluten-free type of a menu and something like that, because these are real issues, and kids want to feel normal. Right. They want to feel normal. They want to be able to feel like they can go out, and they may not be able to eat McDonald's food because of whatever might be out there in the food, but they just want to feel normal.
Well, as we wrap up today, we want to make sure what we're talking about today at 4, 5, and 6. So your research update on what is new and what we need to keep our eyes open for, and realize that. And we'll also be talking about restaurant regulation. We'll be also talking about new research, as you said, and also travel challenges. Obviously everything from airports to airlines to just moving on and about, whether it's from state to state or country to country, you need to be prepared. And we care about what you have to say as well. So if you have comments or you have issues, or you think, hey, you know what, let's cover this topic. This is an ongoing story that we'll be continuing to do. So leave us a message on our Local 4 Facebook page, and we will be more than happy to read that and include that in our coverage. So we thank you so much for watching, and we will see you at 4, 5, and 6 today. And thank you very much for all of your time. All right.